Good morning. I'm Carol Wedge. I am the CEO of Shepley Bulfinch, and I'm the host for this series. So, we're having a monthly conversation on the second Tuesday of each month, and we focus these engagements around certain themes quarterly and spotlighting clients with their projects, our BSA members, and strategies for managing change in the future. And so, our first quarter, which is our third conversation of the quarter, we started with climate change, what we think as one of the most critical issues that we're facing. And we're very pleased today to welcome Dennis Carlberg from BU and Jacob Knowles from BR+A to share the story of the first net zero building at BU. So I'm going to take you just through a little bit of housekeeping. This is the order of the day, and we're going to start with the presentation, then do Q&A, and then do some breakout to have a conversation about this. Love to hear your questions and also suggestions for how the BSA brings more content around net zero and climate action planning to the BSA members. So think about that and think about good questions to ask our guests today. There's a little bit about some housekeeping on just CEUs and guidelines. The most important thing is we are recording this session today, so just be mindful of that. And in many sessions, especially when you get to Q&A, if you have kids or pets you don't want on video, feel free to turn off your video and just use the audio. So without further ado, I want to share, well, one thing I want to say is please come to the next quarter's topics. We have some exciting people lined up to talk about the engines of the market in the second quarter. We have Rick Malmstrom and again Jacob Knowles from Alexandria Real Estate to talk about life sciences and sustainability and strategies for an ultra low fossil fuel lab building, which I think is a really remarkable way to think about lab buildings going forward. So please join us next month, but you can also sign up for the whole series of topics and conversations in a quarter. And you can see the BSA website for that. We'll put that in the chat so it's easy to find. And a shout out to SMPS, who is a sponsor and a supporting partner for this series. So thank you to them, and thank you for the partnerships that the BSA creates around the region and in our profession. So I'd like to start by introducing Dennis and Jacob, who you'll hear from today. Dennis Carlberg is the Associate Vice President for Sustainability at BU. In 2009, he established BU's Sustainability Office and was its first director. He's also an adjunct professor teaching at BU, a faculty advisor to Earth House, which is a living and learning community for sustainability. He's an architect with over 25 years of experience, and he began his career in the Solar Energy Research Institute, conducting daylighting research to reduce building energy consumption and improve indoor air quality. So you can see this has been a passion for Dennis for a long time. He's an architect, a longstanding BSA member, worked at AeroStreet, and has an incredibly long resume of leadership roles in sustainability across the country. He has a long career of being at the forefront of addressing these issues. And at BU, he's the initiative owner for the BU sustainability plan that the university's strategic plan includes. And he serves in many roles in advancing BU's climate action plan. So we're going to hear a lot from Dennis today and excited to have him with us. Second is Jacob Knowles, who's the Director of Sustainable Design at BR+A Engineering, and he leads their sustainability consulting team. He's a zero net energy guru, spearheading millions of square feet of carbon neutral and carbon positive projects. With the help of his team, BR+A projects have received a COAT Top 10 awards, I2SL Go Beyond awards, and Jacob's also serving as a board member at the BSA. So Jacob and Dennis, thank you for being with us today. I want to turn it over to you to hear about this exciting project and a lot of the groundbreaking things that you're doing that we all want to learn from. So Dennis, you can take it away.
Okay, well, thank you,
take
Carol.
Charge.
Thanks for the invitation. This is exciting to be able to share what we're doing, and it's great to see so many people on this morning. Let me get started. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm sure most of you know BU, but let me sort of walk through some quick stats. Well, let me actually get this screen so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, no, I'm still not seeing what I'm doing. There we go, thank you. Okay, so we have 35,000 students. We have about 10,000 faculty and staff. We occupy 15.2 million square feet on 130 acres in Boston. Our site energy use intensity, for those who are into EUI, is for the entire campus is 119 for 2020, down from 150 in 2006, which is our base year that we measure all of our progress from. Our emissions in 2020 were 99,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, which is 40% below our 2006 baseline. So I want to walk through with you our climate action plan a little bit. And first, just as Carol mentioned, sustainability is part of our strategic plan. It is actually of strategic importance to the university. In 2017, we had an 18-member faculty-led task force, which included faculty, staff, and students, to develop an ambitious climate action plan. I have to say that I believe it is ambitious. I know it's ambitious because I'm trying to get it done. But the plan was approved by the Board of Trustees in 2017. It has 5 high-level goals. Goal number 1 is to prepare our campuses for the impacts from climate change that can no longer be avoided. Goal number 2 is to get to net zero direct emissions for our operations by 2040. To act on indirect emissions, those emissions that are not in our direct control, but result from what we buy, what we waste, and how we move. And integrating the climate action or climate change into our educational research mission more than it already is, and integrate the climate action plan into the university's strategic plan. I'll go through really those that relate most to those in the audience today, which is really the first 2, and how that relates to the Center for Computing and Data Sciences. But first, I want to sort of walk through a bit of a timeline, which I think illustrates very well what a difference the climate action plan makes for Boston University. Just walking you through 2 major projects: BU Wind, which we went through a process in 2015 to get to know, as in, no, we can't do this. That was for a large-scale renewable energy project. We brought together Altenex Energy, which is now Edison Energy, along with some other advisors to help us understand how to do this and to get it done. We got to the end of 2015 with a letter of intent, but we couldn't get the project to pencil. Along a similar timeline as the Center for Computing and Data Sciences, we brought that through design into schematic design. We ended up having to put that in the drawer because of other priorities on campus. That project was the same design team that we've completed the project, or we're completing the project with. But that project would be a high performance building. It would have been a LEED Gold project, something we'd all be very proud of, but a lot has changed since then. In 2016 and 17, we developed the climate action plan. While we were developing the climate action plan, I brought that team back that helped us in 2015 to help us understand how we're going to get a power purchase agreement done during the climate action planning process. We developed 10 criteria for the project. And when I went to the Board of Trustees at the end of 2017 for their approval, we knew what the costs and risks would be associated with the 3 projects we were down to at that point. Construction completed, and we began generating power on December 1st last year, so just a month and a half ago. So it's pretty exciting for us. At the same time, we brought the Center for Computing and Data Sciences back out of the drawer, and the design team was told by our senior leadership that we wanted a fossil fuel-free, carbon neutral building. That changed a lot of the process and really caused us to do some deep dives, including drilling boreholes, which we'll talk a little bit more about. The borehole drilling was completed in January 2020. COVID hit and construction really restarted once the hiatus was lifted. So let's talk about the project, the Center for Computing and Data Sciences. In the climate action plan, the plan set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the city's goal. As President Brown likes to talk about it, it's not to beat the city, but if we don't lead and others don't lead with us, the city is not going to be able to meet its goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. Our plans also set out strategies for addressing the impacts from climate change. The center is designed by KPMG architects out of Toronto. And I believe this is really a bold step in transforming the campus and transforming really the DNA of Boston University. Some real highlights here, just the basic stats. It's a 345,000 square foot building, 19 stories. We'll have approximately 3,700 occupants. This is our first building that we've really addressed embodied carbon. It is designed to reduce embodied carbon from a baseline of more than 10%, which equates to almost 2,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. The site energy use intensity for the project is 42, and when we factor in campus solar, which is going to be part of this project, we get the EUI down to 28. The emissions from this project, this is what I love the most, 0. So the center is located on Commonwealth Avenue, and I'm sure you all are pretty well aware where Boston University is. This is a construction photograph from December before the base slab was poured. The tower, the core tower now is more than four stories above grade. So it's moving fast. So I really want to walk through the 7 reasons why this building is transforming Boston University. And I believe actually transforming Boston. Buildings in Boston produce 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in the city. So it's really critically important that we focus on building sector emissions if the city is going to meet its goal by 2050. So reason number 1, resilient design. In our climate action plan, we set an elevation of resilience above which all new building infrastructure, and as we renovate, we move equipment and infrastructure above harm's way. We set that elevation of resilience to be at Boston City Base 20, which is 2 feet above the elevation of the Charles River Dam. So I think that's self-explanatory. But the project here is designed with the first floor 1.25 feet above that elevation of resilience. Reason number 2 is net zero direct emissions. I'm only going to show a couple of graphs, but I think this is really central to how we work. This is our abatement curve. The vertical axis represents our greenhouse gas emissions. The horizontal graph, horizontal is years. The shades of gray are emissions from various fossil fuels, and the shades of the colors address the various strategies for reducing our emissions over the next few decades. First, we will reduce demand by 31% by 2032. We will source our heating from geothermal and air source and move away from fossil fuel use for heating and cooling, so that we can source our energy from renewables. We'll match 100% of the university's electricity use with renewables, and we will begin the transition of our fleet to electric. So how does this relate to the Center for Computing and Data Sciences? As you all know, energy efficiency starts with the building enclosure. The center is designed with external sun shading to keep the sun's heat out in the summer and triple glazing to keep the heat in the winter. Maximizing energy efficiency in the systems used for heating and cooling is really the next step. We employ, or the center employs, 31 1,500-foot deep geothermal boreholes to benefit from the thermal mass of the Earth to put the heat in the summertime and pull that heat back out in the winter. That's illustrated here, roughly to scale. Geothermal in a dense urban campus like BU is very challenging. These boreholes are twice as deep as the John Hancock building is high, which that kind of helped me understand how significant this is. Jacob, do you want to add any color to this?
I think you got it covered, Dennis. I mean, this is actually to scale, so it gives people a good idea of how Herculean a task this was.
Do you want to walk through any of this, or you want me to?
Yeah. So I think it's important to stress that all of the process here really starts with reducing the loads and making the building more efficient. And then you can move towards the next step. So our first step was to bring the EUI of the building down from the base case through load reduction, better envelope, more efficient systems. And actually, the more efficient systems were smaller and saved on construction cost.
Okay. So that allows us, using the thermal mass of the Earth for heating and cooling allows us to move away from natural gas. By moving away from natural gas, that allows us to be fossil fuel free. I think this is particularly bold because there's no gas line connected to this building, which, if you stop and think about that, that's significant. And you know, there's some risk associated with that, and the university is willing to take that risk. By switching from fossil fuel use to electricity, we can source that energy from renewables, from BU wind. And my favorite part of this graph gets us to carbon free. So this is my favorite graph of all time at Boston University, and hopefully we can do more of these. I'm pleased to report that the BU wind project that is now under construction at Angie's Wind Farm in South Dakota is now complete.
Wow.
It is designed to match 100% of the university's electricity use and reduce Boston University's emissions by 53%. According to the US EPA, BU's 205 million kilowatt hour power purchase agreement is the largest power purchase agreement by any college or university participating in the Green Power Partnership, and puts BU's in the partnership's top 100, along with Google, Microsoft, and Walmart. So why did we choose South Dakota and not New England? Because we wanted to find a project that had the greatest impact possible on reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. Since the climate doesn't care where our emissions reductions come from, we chose to find a project that would have the greatest impact possible. And we looked at the projects in the 4 dirtiest grids in the country. We looked at 127 projects. And from there, we found 2 or 3 that maximized our criteria. We chose the one that had the greatest impact. The impact is 2 to 3 times greater than if we did the same project in New England, because of the greenhouse gas intensity of the grid for generating that energy. The project is located on 42 square miles of farmland in South Dakota, generating added income to farmers who lease their land to the project while generating clean power for BU. There are 92 wind turbines in the project. The tip of the blades sweep 500 feet above the ground. The project is designed to match 100% of the university's electricity usage. We will receive the RECs, the renewable energy certificates, from the project, and we will retire them for the benefit of the planet. These RECs are Greenie certified, or will be Greenie certified.
Yeah.
The project is designed to match 100% of the university's electricity load for the next 15 years. And the project began generating in December of 2020. So back to Boston and the Center for Computing and Data Sciences. Indoor environmental quality, reason number 3. A great deal of effort has gone into the design to create healthy, productive, and pleasant spaces for our faculty and staff to learn and work. And the spaces are interconnected to maximize daylight and views. Reason number 4, outdoor environmental quality. Green roofs step up around the building, creating outdoor spaces on 7 levels in the building. It helps reduce our urban heat island effect and provides rainwater retention. Reason number 5, reduced embodied carbon. Embodied carbon in building structure, superstructure, and enclosure represent 28% of global building sector emissions annually. In order to determine where where and how to reduce embodied carbon, the team did a life cycle assessment. As a result, the team managed to reduce the embodied carbon by more than 10%. Mike Grinick at LeMessurier led that effort. Mike is one of the founders of SD 2050, which is similar to Architecture 2030, but only focusing structural engineers to lead the reduction of embodied carbon in buildings. They work closely with the Carbon Leadership Forum. Reason number 6, just announced last week, the project is being designed for zero waste certification through GBCI's True Waste, Zero Waste program. And reason number 7, climate leadership. This is the first building at BU we're actually seeking LEED Platinum certification. As you all know, we won't know until the project is done, but you can see that we're strongly into the Platinum range. And my favorite bar happens to be the Energy and Atmosphere one, which is getting 100% of the points. Thanks to Jacob and his team and KPMB. It's really remarkable in my mind. Let me talk a little bit more about BU's leadership, because I think this is really, really important. In December, at the groundbreaking for the Center for Computing and Data Sciences, Mayor Walsh talked about how Boston University is a climate leader, and the center is a symbol for climate leadership. He sees the center as a leading example of sustainable design and an important solution for helping the city meet its goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. A week after the groundbreaking, Mayor Walsh signed an executive order that all new municipal buildings will be carbon free. We're extremely fortunate to be part of a city with such strong climate leadership. I have to say, I'm very proud of the bold steps the BU is taking to meet its commitments outlined in the Climate Action Plan and exemplified in the Center for Computer and Data Sciences. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you both. We deserve to give you a round of applause, not just for your presentation, but just for the leadership and all of the remarkable places you're looking for making a difference on climate. Knowing that we are going to let Jacob go early because he has a client charrette today, I wanted to get Jacob to talk us a little more, go a little deeper into the energy efficiency of the building. You know, you're talking to a group that really understands the nuts and the bolts of it. So could you dive a little deeper into exactly how you achieve that?
Sure. Yeah. Do you mind just going back one slide just for one sec?
One slide? That slide?
No, the question slide. I just wanted to say
to the team.
yeah, the team. This has really been a huge team effort, and the team is pretty amazing. I see Chris Copley, principal in charge of the project, is here today with us from BR+A, and Luigi LaRocca from KPMB, the architect and brilliant visionaries that really set the course for this project. So thank you guys for joining us today. There's going to be breakout sessions, so people will get to meet the infamous duo here later. So, but go ahead. We can talk a little bit more about the efficiency of the building.
I just before you do that, I want to thank the team, because I'm sorry for not doing that earlier. It's a remarkable team. It's been a real pleasure working with all of you on this, and hearing as things evolve and just get better and better and addressing more and more. It's just been exciting.
Yeah.
So I'll let you go there.
Thanks, Dennis. I agree. So here is a simple overview of the complex mechanical systems in this building. The top shows the dedicated outdoor air system. Those are the ventilation supplying air handlers that provide the ventilation and dehumidification for all the spaces in the building. That air is then supplied down to all the zones, and at the zones we have either fan coil units or chilled beams. The unique thing here is that we didn't just tie the chilled beams to the dedicated outdoor air unit. We connected them through a fan-powered box, and we'll get into that more in a bit. BU committed, as Dennis mentioned, to a building that was 100% natural gas free. There's literally no connection to any natural gas in this building. And so even the backup boilers are all electric. We have a chiller plant, and that includes both water-cooled centrifugal chillers to cooling towers as the peak cooling system. And then the workhorse of the building is the heat pump scroll chillers that are connected to the geothermal bore field, and those do basically all the heating and a big chunk of the cooling. And then to really make this all work, the envelope played a really critical role. So we have triple glazing and exterior shades. If you go to the next slide, we can talk about that a little more. So KPMB did a beautiful job of, having this beautiful open facade that brings in a lot of daylight and view, but also worked with the whole team to manage those loads. And so part of that was an exterior shading system. And there was really two different treatments depending on the depth of the floor plate from the facade to the central core. And as the building floor plate shifts and kind of rotates around the core, that depth between the core and the facade changes. And so here you can see in yellow that deep zone between the core and the facade. And in those areas, we had a higher window to wall ratio and used these diagonal exterior shades to reduce the solar heat gain. And that was then tuned based on the different orientations. And on the next slide, you can see the floor plate shifts relative to the core. And now the zone between the core and the perimeter in yellow is much shallower. And so we don't need as much glass. And in those areas, we used vertical windows that then rotated between glass and then an opaque panel. They don't look opaque because it's a beautiful polished aluminum serrated fin, but that actually alternates between glass and a fully insulated opaque piece of the curtain wall system. All right, now on to some fun mechanical toys. So the DOAS system is a dual wheel system. So people are probably familiar with enthalpy wheels for heat recovery. So as the exhaust air moves out of the building, you're spinning that wheel and pulling that heat or cooling back into the fresh air that's coming into the building, and that reduces your loads. But in this case, we're using two wheels in series, and that has many advantages. One is that second wheel, the orange one, actually helps to further dehumidify the air that's coming into the building, because you've got that exhaust air that's dry going out, and it's able to remove some of the moisture going into the building. So that reduces your loads, and it's a good fit with the chilled beam design. It also gives you free reheat, so there's less heating in the summertime. And in the wintertime, you can run both wheels and you get more effective heat recovery in the wintertime. And you don't risk frosting the first wheel, so you can keep them running at all times. On the next slide, we show, this is a typical floor plan in the tower. And you can see all the dark green rectangles around the perimeter. Those are the chilled beams. I mentioned earlier, one of the creative solutions we did here, instead of just tying those chilled beams to the 100% outdoor air DOAS unit, which would mean that anytime you need heating and cooling in that zone, you need to run your central, 500-pound gorilla air handler to be able to drive those beams and let them run. Well, that's not very efficient at night. If there's nobody in there, why are you ventilating the space or pushing all that air all around the building? Instead, in the light green boxes, there's about 7 of them on a typical floor plate. Those are fan-powered boxes. And those then allow you to fully decouple the ventilation from the space conditioning, because those fan-powered boxes can blow the air through the chilled beams with more airflow, or during unoccupied periods when you might not need to ventilate the building. And so that is a much more efficient and very strategic approach, because rather than fan coil units where you might need dozens of fan coil units on the floor, and that's more maintenance and more cost, this gives you just a few small points of maintenance to get you all that energy benefit. And ultimately, we reduce the energy consumption of the building using those strategies from 67 to 42. And then once you apply the solar power that'll be installed on campus on a number of different buildings, we allocated a certain percent of that to the data sciences building, and that brings us to 28. And then ultimately, the wind power from offsite gets us to 0.
And Jacob, you have Chris backing you up answering questions in the chat. So thanks, Chris. That's really great.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, you got the backup team. Jacob, do you want to go a little bit to cost? I know you wanted to share some thoughts about cost.
Yeah,
Just thinking about that.
That's always the first question people ask, right? You see this very beautiful building, and you look at, you look at the geothermal and the 1,500 feet deep, and you think, wow, this must have cost a fortune. There are certain pieces that cost a lot, and there are other pieces that cost less. And so this diagram here shows one of the things that costs less. So because a conventional academic facility like this with high density conferencing and classrooms and so forth would typically be an all air VAV reheat system. If you compare the size of all of the larger all air systems, the cost of those systems, and also the space that they require, which on the left hand side is our design, on the right hand side is in pink. You can see all the extra spaces that we would need to capture for larger shafts, for additional air handlers, for more mechanical space. And every square foot costs X dollars, right? And so you add that up, and it's actually a very significant cost driver. So we were able to save all of that cost, not having to build more space and build larger systems, and then take that savings and reinvest it into things like the higher performing envelope and the geothermal. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see that overall, there was less than a 1% construction cost premium comparing a conventional design versus the net zero design. And clearly a large portion of what kind of ate up all that savings was the geothermal bore field. That's something that we're seeing over and over again on projects. We're consistently able to achieve net zero buildings with less than a 1% construction cost premium. And it's not just us. Built Environment Plus recently came out with a report where they've surveyed 7 million square feet of net zero and net zero ready buildings in Massachusetts. And of those that reported their cost data and did a comparison between conventional design and net zero design, 85% indicated that the premium was less than 1%. And so I think the key here is just to be strategic and not just add bells and whistles, but find strategies that reduce cost to offset some of the premiums and get to a holistic solution that is actually very cost effective.
Jacob, that's great. Thank you so much. We're getting a couple questions. Some of them are getting answered in chat. But before you leave us, because we know you have a workshop today, can you step out of your role a little bit and just kind of reflect on your path to your role as the leader of sustainable design at BR+A, but also just maybe, sort of your broader perspective on the market and what you're hopeful people will begin to embrace in terms of net zero and climate change?
Yeah, so those are kind of one and the same in a sense. I came to BR+A almost 11 years ago now, and Chris Copley, my boss, was one of the people that brought me in. And it was really driven by a commitment from our firm to say, this is where we need to go. We need to have dedicated team that's focused on this, that's really, integrating us nationally on this initiative to design truly sustainable buildings. And so that's kind of been my charge. And it's funny because it didn't start as everything is going to be net zero, right? That was 11 years ago. That was kind of a twinkle in our eye, right? And one of our first net zero projects started operation in 2016. It's actually right up here, Bristol Community College. It's only 50,000 square feet. It's only 2 stories tall. It's not nearly the challenge that BU.
It's your prototype.
Yeah, exactly. But it's been amazing seeing the exponential growth in the market. I mean, New Buildings Institute's been tracking it, and you can see all their charts for net zero buildings are going off on an exponential curve. Built Environment Plus's report is showing the same thing, and our portfolio's been following those same paths, and we're trying to really lead the industry on that. And it's just so satisfying to see this momentum building. I wouldn't have dreamed it would be happening so quickly, but I guess once people get it and they see the benefits and the financial advantages, and there's this commitment and momentum, the barn door just kind of flies open, right? And it's like, okay, this is the new normal now. So everybody's really jumping on board.
Well, and maybe a corollary to that, Dennis, do you want to talk a little bit about your path and, just sort of if you step out of your exact role at BU, if you could speak to the market as the client, what are the things that have been pivotal for you as you reflect on this remarkable project and all the accomplishments you're achieving at BU?
Well, it gets to market transformation, which Jacob has talked about. And as a large institution, I feel like we have the responsibility to do what we can to move that market. And that's a big part of the value of this project, from the carbon-free, fossil fuel-free perspective to the embodied carbon And, I think we have a long way to go. I mean, we have, as an industry, a long way to go to address embodied carbon. And it comes from causing the market to change and just starting to pull these levers. And the more the levers we pull, the more the market shifts. And as Jacob says, the barn doors begin to open. And, I think that's what we're looking for. How can we influence the marketplace? And that's what LEAD's about. The mission is to transform the marketplace. So, and I believe it has substantially. We have a long way to go, but I feel like we've made a lot of progress too. And I think that's also part of why we're after zero waste and getting true zero waste certification for this project after it's open, is to, again, transform the marketplace and begin to develop a circular economy.
So Billy's asking a question. You can read it in the chat to see. I also had a question about how we follow up the construction cost conversation with sharing a little more about the life cycle costs and getting to the operating costs, because linking those two in a sustainable project shows you the whole picture and shows you the whole picture over time.
Let me talk about existing buildings.
Okay.
Billy's comment there. That is their biggest challenge. There's no question in my mind that that's our biggest challenge. And the opportunity is, as our buildings age and as we need to renovate them, there are times in the life of a building where you can begin to invest. And it's a matter of thinking about those investments when you're doing that work and not trying to retrofit buildings that are not at their point of renovation.
Yeah,
Great.
we're
ahead,
working
Jacob.
on a number of deep energy retrofit and carbon neutral master plan projects right now, including City of Somerville, UMass Lowell, University of Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay campus. And it really comes back to the same themes of, you got to start with efficiency and load reduction. I know there's a lot of moves now on campuses to start putting in enormous geothermal plants, and clearly that's part of the puzzle. But you don't want to just throw geothermal at the problem, because it ends up being expensive, right? So the critical first step is get the loads down, make the buildings more efficient, set ultra low heating load standards for new buildings and renovations, and then you can start to backfill infrastructure that's fossil fuel free.
There's a question about South Dakota and whether, Dennis, you're going to continue to invest in that and build on that, or evaluate other.
That's a great question. I think the intent for going to South Dakota was to find a large project, and as I mentioned, to actually have impact on greenhouse gas reductions. The project's designed to match 100% of the university's electricity demand. And as we get to the end of the 15-year power purchase agreement, we will reevaluate what the right strategy is for addressing that. It could be, hopefully, the New England grid is continuing to green at a rate of about 1.25% a year. So and that's on track to get to 80% reduction of emissions in the grid by 2050. But as Jacob knows, there's a lot of work going on to try to accelerate that process. It could be in 15 years our grid is carbon neutral. Who knows? I don't know that.
Or the choices might be different.
And our choice, we chose a 15-year power purchase agreement. We chose that time to give us time to figure out what's happening in the marketplace. Like I said before, it's about transforming the marketplace. What does the market look like in 15 years, or maybe 12 years for us to think about, okay, what's our next step? And so that by the end of that 15-year power purchase agreement, we're poised to do what's the next right step to address our electricity.
That's great. That's great. So right now we're going to shift to some breakout rooms, and we hope that you'll enjoy talking with each other, but also think about other questions we want to ask, also inform other BSA programming of other topics that we want to explore, or which parts of examples like the BU data science building we want to go deeper into. So Patricia is going to facilitate, BSA is going to facilitate sending us to breakout rooms, enjoy seeing each other, have a intense conversation. And Jacob, we want to thank you because we know you're going to go off to something else. So huge thanks for leading this, but also huge thank you to your other team members for joining us today and helping answer questions. So we're going to go to breakout rooms for about 20 minutes, and then we'll be back. So please join us when you come back. We want to hear what you talked about, and we'll have time for more questions for Dennis and for each other around this project and these really important issues. So thanks, Jacob and Patricia. You can send us to our breakout groups.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Dennis.
Jacob, thanks a lot.
Welcome back, everybody. We're slowly coming back. Dennis, I think we're going to have quite a few questions for you. The first one, as people just rejoin, was to be a little more clear about the backup generation. You mentioned there's no gas line to the building, but I don't think we went deeper into what your emergency power backup generation strategy is for the data science building. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, that would be great.
Well, Luigi's on. He's the architect who's the brains
Hi,
behind this
Luigi.
whole thing.
Great to meet you.
Hi, I
Luigi, you want to
actually
answer that?
I want to do a couple of shout outs. One is to Paolo Rocha, who's principal, now partner of KPMB, who was the lead designer on this project and has worked with me and led the design from the very beginning when we first started this project almost 8 years ago. And the other one is TransSolar. They call themselves climate engineers. They're based in Stuttgart, but we work with their New York office. We work with them on a number of projects, and they have had a huge influence on KPMB and others in terms of how you come up with a holistic approach to energy design. That emphasis, there's an emphasis on making good space and comfortable space for people first, and then making the energy work with people. So just wanted to bring that up. But fire away. I found we just got started in our breakout session.
Yeah, I know. They go fast. They go fast. I feel like
way too fast, way too fast.
Well, I feel like we should plant the seed for having a bigger design discussion with the full AEC team. But that will be in the future. So I think our nerdy question for now was, tell us a little bit more about how the backup generation works and how you advocated for no gas line or alternative fossil fuel source for emergency needs.
Well, that's definitely a BR+A question.
Dennis, do you want to chime in on that, or do you want?
Do we have Chris still?
Chris still with us?
Doesn't look like Chris is
It doesn't
with
look
us.
like he's probably in the same workshop with Jacob
Probably,
today.
yeah. Yep.
So give us the short answer. We can follow up with more detail.
Okay, my sense is the emergency generator is actually a diesel generator. Is that correct, Luigi?
Yes, it is. It is.
So that probably should be a little more clearly defined in my presentation. But that was not possible to get as a fossil fuel free piece of this puzzle. And I think, it gets to that market transformation piece, right? And regulations and so on. I believe it's a regulatory issue. I haven't practiced architecture for 10 years. So Luigi, you thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Just too far back to remember what prevented.
That's okay. We can follow up with the. I think all of us live that. So whether it's regulation or there just really isn't a better alternative yet, but there should be someday. But there's a couple of questions in the chat that, Dennis, I thought we could talk about. And one is a question about the plans for the BU medical area and how you're thinking about your medical campus relative to your climate action plan.
Sure. Hey, Juan, great to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time. So medical campus is right now, the dental school is has completed construction. That will be, I believe, LEED Gold. The strategies we use are apply to both campuses. I think from a climate action planning perspective, the biggest issue related to the medical campus is really preparing for climate change. It is lower lying and it's closer to harm's way.
Great. And then there's another that, again, maybe we're missing our engineers on this, about how to balance the use of geothermal and heat energy in and out of the building and the ground year round. Well,
that's a great value for heating and cooling because you're using the earth as a way to store that energy, and when you're cooling and heating, you're changing that how you operate throughout the year. So you're helping to balance the system with the ground.
Does that answer your question, Marcus? Feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to clarify.
Yeah, it is. I was just thinking about just with a school having different schedules and being able to fully utilize that kind of heat rejection and extraction on cooling season. If there's, if there's people are not in the building much in the summer, I was just curious how the occupancy affects that, what you were describing, Dennis.
Oh, the occupancies can be pretty constant throughout the year. So they'll be a little lower in the summertime, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. One thing that we are looking at is district geothermal and how we can do that. And in that scenario, you really want to look for a range of loads, so that while you have a high intensity use during the day in one use, you have a higher intensity use load for another use at a different time of the day. So you can balance that as well as what you're putting in and pulling out of the ground.
So Dogan is asking a question about the EUI and metrics in the server farm. Dogan, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask that question?
Sure. I'm just curious, maybe I missed it, but this is a data center, and of course using enormous amounts of, I assume, data processing, much of which I assume is happening off-site in server farms in the Arizona desert, and which I understand to be enormous energy consumption projects. And so I just wondered how you incorporate the use associated with the function of the building into the EUI or whatever other metrics you're using.
I can let Luigi chime in here, but before that, we're actually using the Massachusetts Green Performing Computing Center out in Hadley, Mass, Western Mass. I'm blanking, but it's a joint project between BU, Harvard, MIT, UMass, Northeastern, to use that server farm that was built about 10 years ago, a LEED Platinum building, and that's using renewable energy. It's located out there because it is next to a hydro facility. So most of that energy is a low impact hydro. It's an historic dam, but that's where the main computing is happening. There is some computing happening in this building, but not much not as much as you would think. Luigi, do you want to add a little to that?
Yeah, to reinforce that, Dennis, it's really a teaching and research facility, and the computing power is outside the building. There is some computing power in the building, but it's not a big significant piece of the energy puzzle, because it's just not that significant.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to take the questions in a slightly different direction around how we use these incredibly successful projects to change the market, as Dennis, as you've sort of alluded to. And can you talk a little bit about, sort of risk versus leadership? And maybe that's also a little bit of a back to the future question. You've been on quite a journey, and others on your team might want to comment. If you're going to start it all again, is there anything you would do differently? Or thinking about the future, how do you use this project to really help educate people of what's possible?
Great question. Whether we do it differently, well, we'd start out differently now after the climate action plan, for sure. And Luigi wouldn't have had to go through this twice. But I think for how we think about changing the marketplace, I guess for me, it gets back to embodied carbon. That is not where we started here. That was something actually LEED and a goal after we were doing all this great stuff and not tracking LEED platinum. You know, senior leadership was asking, well, why can't this be platinum if we're doing all this? Which is a great question. So we all went into a room to figure out how we could get there. And Mike at LeMessurier said, well, you know, why don't we look at embodied carbon here a little more seriously? And we did. And we did it at a time, you know, is before the GMP set was done and got that incorporated. I think if we were to start from the beginning, I'll let Luigi talk to this because, you know, it's really starting projects with the goals in mind and bringing goals. We all know that if we set a goal to do a project and meet certain criteria, we can do that. And if we start at the beginning, the costs associated with those decisions are going to be minimal. If we make those decisions later on in the process, they're not going to be minimal. And, you know, I think it really gets to how we set up those goals at the beginning of a project and stick to those goals. And I'm, you know, frankly, I'm very proud with the way that BU has done that on this project.
Mm-hmm.
Once we got the climate action plan, that was very direct. But adding things later on gets more complicated, but we were able to pull it off for the embodied carbon piece of this. Luigi?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, it really was the LeMessurier, the structural engineer, really you know, pushed this on the table for us because initially what we're hearing is that you know, there's only a certain number of concrete suppliers in the Boston area. They have their traditional mixed designs for concrete. It would be very difficult to change them. It would be really expensive, and it really wasn't worth pursuing. And LeMessurier just said, well, not really. You know, the industry is changing, and we can do something about this. And so BU asked them, well, what do we need to do? And they said, well, first we need to do a study, and they paid for that study. And through that, we ended up with the process where I can't tell you exactly how much we accomplished in terms of the carbon footprint, but I know that it went to a certain distance within what we could accomplish with the building. But the end result to the concrete was a $30,000 change order. That's what it took to deal with some embodied carbon and make the next step. And so that is exactly changing the industry, because it turned out that the suppliers are saying, yeah, we can do this. A little bit more work, but it wasn't much.
Yeah, and if you had known you wanted to do that work earlier and earlier in the process, it would have made it easier too. Right?
The 30,000 may not have even existed if we had been able to do it at the beginning of the project.
Yeah. So I think we're planting a seed for some future deeper dive on the project. And Luigi, we'd love to have think about that with you and hear a little bit more also from LeMessurier and TransSolar, and really acknowledge the leadership that you guys have provided. I think another question, and maybe this is for both you and Dennis, is, you know, the sort of difference between being an advocate with your client. So it's not, this is the way we usually do things, but helping them look at things differently and navigate the risks of that. And I think some of that, my question is a little bit the backstory. The ulterior motive is to empower BSA members and our full AEC teams to bother to ask the questions that LeMessurier asked, to bother to, you know, take the questions in a way that you can explore them. But can you talk a little bit about that, about how you see that, like, kind of permission, risk, leadership, innovation, navigation working, and maybe just some motivational suggestions you might have for the attendees today?
Well, I can tell you that Dennis made it easy. You know, we didn't have to convert BU leadership. They were already in a place where they wanted to do something better. And all we needed to do as a group was demonstrate that it wasn't going to cost an arm and a leg, that the industry was capable of it, that
Yep.
we weren't doing anything exotic. There's nothing remarkably special about any of the products or systems in the building. They're just put together in a particular way. And when you first start on a project, you get into a relationship and you have to assess what your client is ready to look at and see. And in BU, we saw a client that was ready for anything, and so we went for it. And some ideas didn't happen. Uh, I might get slapped on the wrist for this, but my one big regret is that this is not a raised floor building. For a computing group, raised floor would have just been
Given
off
them
the charts in terms
flexibility.
of flexibility and
Yeah.
doing underfloor air and displacement ventilation would have been another level.
Another step.
Much to the energy signature, not a huge amount, but we knew early on that there just aren't a lot of raised floor projects in Boston. It just wasn't in the cards, and so that's one of the things that we studied, but didn't push hard on. But everything else, Dennis, I can't think of anything that I feel we missed. It's the BU plan that deals with resiliency, and that was something that we hadn't a lot of experience with, and we got to a very good place in terms of how we future-proof the building for what may be the big flood next week. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dennis, I want to give you the last word, and there's a lot of other detailed questions, so I'm sure we'll follow up with them. But just your reflections on, something you'd like to leave the BSA members with, and you've been such a great leader all of your career. But as you look to the future, is there any message you want to just leave us with as we end our session today?
Yeah, and I think it builds on what Luigi was saying. I think we know how to get this done. We as an industry know how to get this done. And it is about market transformation. And I will say, and I will tell you that we've brought a lot of people through the project to, as we were drilling the boreholes and doing all that and addressing the challenges that came with that. I am happy to have conversations with people about what we're doing, how we're doing it, because I'm all about change, and I want to be able to do whatever I can to help other organizations change along with us. I think we're in a world of kind of leapfrogging right now with this project. We're doing something really, really new and exciting. But a year from now, somebody else is going to be doing something more new and more exciting. And I think we need to continue to learn from one another in order to advance what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Like I said, many organizations have come to BU to see what we're doing. We've held workshops on what we're doing. We work closely with the Green Ribbon Commission and the Green Ribbon Commission's knowledge exchange. Great learning opportunities there. So I want to share. And if there's ever anything I can do to help another organization start to do what we're doing, great, because we all have to do this together.
That's a great way to end this. So I just want to thank you, thank Jacob, thank Luigi, and the rest of the team who joined us today. Your participation and questions really help frame the conversation and frame the programs that we want to bring to you. So please let us know what you want to hear more about. I think we're excited to see the data sciences building come out of the ground, and we'll take Dennis up on his offer for more information and tours and just continuing to share that journey. So I hope you'll join us next month on April 13th. Our program will be Life Sciences and Sustainability, Exploring Opportunities with Alexandria Real Estate with Rick Malmstrom, Executive Director of Sustainability Operations for Alexandria, as well as Jacob. We're interested in your questions, and we hope that you'll join us and really participate and make it a terrific event. So Dennis, a huge thank you to you. We thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being a change agent. This has been a really exciting program, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Take
Bye.
care, Dennis. Thanks a lot. That was awesome.